So today we are talking about Running Lean, which is a business book that I have found super useful, both in building NT, my retail tech business, and building Tech For Non-Techies. And I find that it's generally a super useful book for whenever you're thinking of doing something new, or when you are stuck in a situation when you have to do something new. And because so many of us are forced into pivoting right now, pivoting our businesses or pivoting our careers, or maybe we're worried about losing our jobs, and so we're thinking of other options, or essentially we want to prove to our employers that we should be there, we should stay. So I think this is a really good time for this book. So essentially the main premise of this book is that most products fail, which I think most of us know, unfortunately. I've heard from a Harvard Business School case study that 95% of products brought to market fail. So that's pretty rubbish. And if you also add a global pandemic, where are we? Probably 99.9? So basically gloomy, very gloomy. But it doesn't have to be gloomy, because essentially we often fall in love with a product, and we fall in love with a product so much we end up building it, even though actually the world doesn't necessarily need it. And so, I mean, that's a founder mistake, or that's the entrepreneur mistake, or whoever's making the product. So it could be a founder, an entrepreneur, or a product manager if you're working in a bigger company. Sometimes we fall in love with our ideas and we ignore all the red flags. I mean, I'm sure we've all been in situations, maybe outside of work, when we really want something to work, and then because of that we ignore lots of our red flags. But I think it's also really relevant now, because maybe things were good until the beginning of March. Maybe our product was selling, maybe things were working out, but they're just not anymore. So take that with that pinch of salt. So essentially, what does Ash suggest we do? By the way, Ash, he himself is a technology entrepreneur, and I'm kind of copying his route, because he's got a tech company, but then he started sharing his knowledge in workshops and courses and a book, and that's essentially what I'm doing. Don't have a book yet, but the podcast is getting ready to launch. Anyway, so what does Ash say? Ash says that we need to be focusing on the problem and not the product. So this is something that essentially a lot of technology people do. They fall in love with a product rather than the problem. But also, I don't think we should just say it's just the techies. I think when we have an idea, we have a tendency to think it's wonderful, and if people don't understand the idea, that it's their fault. The book actually says that what we need to do is we need to ask our customers what problems do they have, and then work on solutions. So it's very much problem first. If your business has lost its revenues right now, or you're having a problem with your product, essentially your customers still have problems, right? So for example, if we're thinking of stylists. So in my retail technology business, we connect stylists to users, but then also we work with retailers to provide data on consumer behavior. So obviously that is not going so well right now, because people aren't going out, people aren't going shopping, shops are closed, etc., etc. But what are we seeing? We're seeing that people actually still want to look nice. So people want to look nice, but maybe they want to look nice in a different way. So they want to look nice on a Zoom call. So they still have a problem. They still want to look good in their interactions with people. Just the way that is actually happening has just changed. So the problem is still there, but the solution needs to adapt, which is what we're doing. Another thing that he says, which I found really, really important, is that you need to charge for your product from day one. And I think that this actually goes against a lot of the Silicon Valley kind of mantra that you should just get people onto your product, see if they like it, and only then charge. So I was just wondering, I'd love it if you could just write in the chat box, What do you think of this point about charging from day one for something new? Does this resonate with you? Do you think it's a good idea? Or do you think, no, let's create something and then let's just see how it goes? I'd love to hear your views. I am not charging for this webinar right now, but I'm still testing something. So essentially, the reason why he says you should always be charging literally from day one is because what Ash is saying is that unless you are asking people for money for whatever your product is, you don't know how much people really want the product. Because lots of us, I mean, I'm sure lots of us have taken random things from, when they're being handed out at subway stations that we didn't really want. You kind of just take some kind of new, I don't know, health bar and only look at it when you're already in the train, and then, but you would have never actually paid for it. So what does that actually tell the manufacturer of this health bar? It doesn't really necessarily tell them much. It doesn't really tell them anything unless you've actually paid for it. So if you're starting to charge people, you will be able to tell whether actually they really do want it. I'm saying all of this on a free webinar. So what was my thinking here? In the book, Ash is always talking about testing. So you're always testing. Sometimes you're testing a product. So sometimes, one thing that I could be doing is I could be testing, do you, my potential customers, do you want to pay for this? But actually, that's not the thing that I'm testing. The thing that I'm testing is myself. I'm doing this Tech For Non-Techies book club for the first time, and I'm testing myself because I already have a lot to do. I basically run 2 businesses. I do quite a lot of media, and also I want to have some, I need to have some Netflix time. So I'm testing whether I have the bandwidth to do this and how often I want to do this. And the only way I could find this out is by essentially creating a presentation and getting people onto this. So I'm still running the test, just the test is not about you, the test is about me. Maybe if I decide to do this again, then maybe I will begin charging, and then the test will be about, okay, now that I know I can do this on a regular basis, do people actually want to pay? Maybe that will be iteration number 2. So I can see we've got Stephen Champion, who is saying it doesn't work if you're launching into a space with competitors who don't charge for similar services like social networking. So yeah, I mean that's definitely something that I have come across, and so I think some people have one view, Ash has another view. So it's worth pointing out that he is directly against what the get people onto your platform, get as many of them as possible, and then charge. So he's completely against that. He is also saying that you should fundraise as late as possible, which quite a lot of people say as well. Because what he is saying is that what you want to do is once you've worked out what the problem is, so, once you've worked out the problem is, then you begin creating a solution. And it takes a bit of time to create a solution that people actually want. I mean, I've created lots of different solutions. Some of them have been kind of A+, but some of them have been a definite F. And many of them have been in between. So it takes a while to kind of match the problem and solution. And what Ash is saying is that you don't want to be fundraising when you are trying to work out what your solution is to a problem. You only want to be fundraising when you've worked out what your solution is, and all you need to do is scale. Essentially, you're saying, this thing is really small, but it's really good. If you give me money, I will take this small thing and make it big, and then it will reach more people and will make even more money. So great, that's fantastic, but that's not possible for a lot of companies. That's not possible for a lot of businesses. So you need money from somewhere. So for example, at NT, when we're building our consumer app, like I can't code. I didn't know how to create an app. So you need a back-end developer, you need a front-end developer, you need a designer. I didn't I didn't, it's not possible for one person to do all of those well, and definitely not for somebody who is not a technical person. So I needed to get money from somewhere. So I ended up raising some money from seed investors even before, like literally just on an idea. And essentially, Ash is saying sometimes you have to do this, but if you can possibly avoid it, don't do it. So you need money from somewhere, which is why he says sell related stuff along the way. So, and I think a lot of us are coming to this situation right now when we're either having to pivot our businesses, or we are having to really up that side hustle that we had, or, even if we're financially doing fine, which, I hope many of you are, but, unfortunately I know that, some of us are just not good. That's not going to be the case. You might just have time. So if you have time, maybe if you're furloughed, actually you can sell related stuff to your job along the way. What he means is that make money for your company in a way that is relevant to its core business. So for example, if the problem that your customers are facing is that they are old and they're alone and they don't know how to use technology. So I'm assuming quite a lot of people have that problem. Maybe your solution is going to be literally calling them on the phone and giving them tutorials on how to use Zoom, phone tutorials. Like I literally just made that up. Maybe that exists, maybe it's rubbish, I don't know. But it might take a while for these elderly people to know about your service and about your solution, and basically it might take some time for you to make money out of this. So how can you take that solution or those skills and sell related stuff along the way? Well, what you could do, which is what Ash is doing with his book and his workshops, and like his stuff is genuinely really good. And essentially what I'm doing with Tech For Non-Techies is that, it's separate to my actual main business. My main business is this retail technology business. We've got investors. That's like a kind of proper business. But the Tech For Non-Techie stuff is related to that. So it doesn't take away, because essentially I'm sharing my knowledge and I'm sharing my network and I'm sharing my skills. And, this is an example. I read this book for my main business. So what can you do that is kind of parallel to what you're already doing that you could potentially be selling in online courses or in workshops or as consultancy that you could be charging for? Now, has anybody heard of the Lean business model canvas? Because it is different from the Lean canvas, which was originally launched by Eric Ries. They're slightly different. So I'm just curious. It's okay if nobody's heard of it. It's totally fine. This is not an exam. The reason why I'm doing this is so you guys don't have to. Okay, I'm gonna assume it's a no. So what the lean product canvas does. The lean product canvas is what technology and engineering firms are really built on. The lean product, which is not the lean model canvas, the lean product canvas is essentially all about failing fast. So make a minimum viable product. So make the simplest solution to a problem possible, release it out onto the wild. So give it to people, see how they use it, and then make it better. So how often you would have, an app on your phone and then it just automatically updates. So it would have features that are slightly different today than maybe they were 2 weeks ago. Or maybe the logo is different today than it was 2 weeks ago. And you didn't have to do anything for that to happen. That's basically software updates being pushed to your phone. So that's basically the company learning how you use the product and each time making incremental changes to hopefully improve the product. That's basically kind of the engineering iteration. I talk more about it in Tech For Non-Techies courses. If you want to learn more about this, then take one of those, but this is not about that. But essentially the mentality is release the smallest possible thing don't spend too much time or too much money in like massive forward planning. Make the small thing, release it, see how people react to it. So are people using it? Do they like using it? Where are the problems? And then iterate as you go. So Ash read that book by Eric Ries, which is actually a really good book, and then applied that same methodology to business models. So what I just talked about, the Eric Ries thing, that is about product. So creating, it was originally written about software products, so basically apps and websites, and now algorithms. And we're taking that exact same thing and applying it to business models. So who here has ever written a business plan? Just write yes or no. I have written several business plans of varying quality. Yes. Stephen, I would love to know how do you feel about that experience? Oh, we've got Ian also saying yes. Because I mean, I've written several, mainly to placate various investors, and they have taken me fucking ages. And honestly, for a software startup, it's like you kind of, I mean, you're not completely making it up as you go along, but it's a lot of assumptions. Yeah, many months of mainly non-intentional fabrication. I love this, and I love your turn of phrase as well. Like you're not lying, like, but you're in a situation where you essentially have to make stuff up, because if you're sitting there at your kitchen table and you're being asked to project your cash flow in 5 years about a product that doesn't yet exist, that you don't really know how to build, like, is that necessarily good use of your time? I mean, I would say no, since I've written several business plans, which, were like these proper kind of long things, with all these appendices, et cetera, and they become a work of fiction. But you do need a plan. You do need a plan, because you need to know somewhere. You need to understand where you're going, and also if you don't have a plan, people are not going to fund you. People are not going to want to work with you, and they shouldn't. So what Ash Maurya, I hope I'm saying that right. What he is saying is that instead of writing this long library document, create an iterative model that you're always going to be changing. So essentially, we're going to go through the business model canvas in just a few minutes, and that's kind of like the most important aspect of the book. But I wanted to cover the other aspects first, because otherwise we'll just be doing the model forever and ever. So he says you should do this canvas literally within 20 minutes, and I've done it. Like, I'm going to show you what I've done for Tech for Non-Techies, and it literally took me about 20 minutes, and it was completely imperfect. And maybe in a year's time I'll be looking at it and thinking, what a bunch of rubbish. However, it is exactly the same ideas that apply to making an app or a website as your minimum viable product. You find a problem, you create a version of a solution, you push it out to who you think are your customers, and you see how they react. If that doesn't work, you change your lead model canvas. Okay, so are we ready for this? Yes, these are this is basically the thing that you need to be creating within like in 20 minutes. So instead of a business plan, make this thing. And here, so Ash literally has, can you see it here? So Ash has written it out like this. He says that this should be a 1-page document. So don't take all of these things and basically turn them into a business plan of 50 pages, because that's exactly what a business plan is, right? Like, I've written many pages on channels that we would be using, and now those channels don't even exist. So that was rubbish. He says, take this, fit it into a page, and do this within 20 minutes. So as you might be able to see, I started filling this out. So these are examples for Tech for Non-Techies. I'm telling you about it because that's what I know, and I think, since many of you would have found me through the meetup group or are already subscribers. At least you will know that business a little bit. Hopefully also it's not too difficult to understand. So what he says is, he says to do it in order, and later I'll show you the full order. But he says the first thing we need to do is we need to understand what the problem is. So and when he says that do this plan within one sitting and on one page, he says don't worry if you don't have everything filled out. And I certainly didn't when I first started doing this. And with some answers you'll be really sure of them, with others you're going to have no idea. Like, for example, if you're a non-technical person and you're trying to find costs for how to make something, how to make an app or a website, you're not going to know this in the first 20 minutes. Like, I know this now, but it's not something that you'll know, but you should know the problem. So list the top 1 to 3 problems you think need to be solved. So I'm going to give you a quote that Ash also has from Clayton Christensen. Clayton Christensen was kind of one of the top management thinkers and taught at Harvard Business School for several years. And he says, when people need to get a job done, they hire a product or service to do it for them. The marketer's task is to understand what jobs periodically arise in customers' lives for which they might hire products the company could make. So basically, we need to figure out what problems the people have and are they willing to pay for them. So that's your problem number 1. Then he talks about, then he says we need to go to customer segments. So essentially, what is the problem and who is experiencing it? So I'm just going to give you like what I've been thinking about Tech for Non-Techies. The problem is that the tech sector feels impenetrable to people who are outside it. So you don't know what you don't know, and you don't even know where to start. So who are the customer segments there? Ash says kind of begin, you'll probably begin with quite widely, but it's better that you go niche. Because if I were to say it's everybody who is interested in technology, building a business for that is going to be it's going to be impossible, because maybe a 14-year-old is interested in doing a kind of computer science GCSE, and maybe your grandmother is interested in learning how to use Zoom so she could talk to you in isolation. So those are both customer segments who feel technology is impenetrable. Should they be using the same solution? Would you approach them in the same way? Absolutely not. So then you go a bit further down. So for Tech for Non-Techies, I thought, okay, that is going to be professionals. So these are smart people. So professionals who probably know something about business, about marketing, people who already have careers, but they want to get into the tech sector. Then, okay, go down. So who is it? Is it going to be people who want to transition? Is it, you are working in ITV and you want to transition into Netflix? Or is it going to be somebody who wants to make an app for, I don't know, for stylists, for example, and they have a background in fashion, but they have no idea about how to make an app. So because those are different sections of population. So basically he says that go as niche as possible in your customer segments, but also think about who your early adopters are. Because I'm assuming that some of you would have heard the term early adopters, but not everybody would have done. So if you don't know, can you just write no, and I will explain it. It's perfectly fine. Nobody comes out of the womb knowing what an early adopter is. Okay. So basically, some people, for whatever reason, are going to be more likely to be open to trying new stuff than others. So sometimes it's age, sometimes it's fashion, sometimes it also differs across different products. So for example, I'm not going to watch a show unless I've heard from lots and lots of people that it's good. I know it's rubbish. Like I'm kind of weird like that, but I'm a super early adopter to technologies. So yeah, Netflix show takes me ages. If you want me to try new software, I'm going to be there. So it also depends on people. So he says, so figure out what the 1 to 3 problems you believe there are. Then figure out who is experiencing them. Then within who is experiencing them, who do you think is going to be most likely to be open to try new products? So now, previous example, we had a 14-year-old and your grandmother. So in general, unless you have like a super cool grandma who is just open to lots of new things, in general, younger people are going to be more digitally and tech savvy, and in general are going to be more risk taking and are going to be more likely to try new stuff. Also, if you're making a technology product that's aimed at tech people in general, kind of young tech guys tend to be pretty open to trying new product. But if you're that's only relevant if you're making a product for young techie men. If you're making a product for, say, 24-year-old women, they're not going to be interested. So think about your customer segment, and then only then start thinking about your unique value proposition. And note how in the first 3 things we haven't actually talked about the solution. And the reason why, like, I know this now, so I've been running NT now for what, like 4 years. Our solution has changed because our business, the business, as I keep on telling investors, the business and our products are different things. Sometimes one solution seems to be working and bringing us success, then that solution is no longer relevant. Or maybe that solution wasn't particularly relevant in the first place, we just didn't listen to the market properly. The point is, what is the general problem are you solving? What are the general customer segments? And then you make them solutions in whatever different ways. So for your unique value proposition, Ash says, make sure that you're different because you're unique, but make sure that it matters, so that your difference actually matters. So for example, this makes me think of Uber and Lyft. Do you remember? So Lyft is kind of an equivalent of Uber in the US. We don't have it in the UK. And when Lyft first launched, they launched with this whole kind of like, we're social and we're nice. Uber, they treat their drivers like drivers, and so you sit at the back. Whereas with Lyft, you sit in the front seat of the car. And they were trying to say that this is unique, and that's kind of part of their UVP. I don't know about you, but I don't like that. That's different, but it's either neutral or off-putting. I don't particularly, if I'm going from one place to another, I don't necessarily need to become friends with the person who's driving me there. Like, I want to be nice to them and I want to be polite, but sitting in the front seat with them for me, is not a unique value proposition. If anything, it's just annoying. What was a unique value proposition to me when I went to the States and I had the opportunity to take Uber or Lyft, was that their CEO was not linked to a lot of sexual harassment claims. Like that mattered to me. I wanted to support a company that was known not to have a toxic culture. So that was a UVP for me. So basically, don't just be different, but make sure that your difference actually is relevant. And also he says, focus on finished story benefits. Basically what that means in normal people language, because dear Ash, we love him, but he did begin as a developer. So some of the language here and some of the turns of phrase are a bit developery. Not that was a particularly good turn of phrase either, sorry. But anyway, what he's saying, the finished story benefit is, what is the great, wonderful thing that you expect to happen if your customer uses your product? So imagine you are like, let's take eHarmony. let's take eHarmony and Tinder. They're both dating apps, but their finished story benefits are different. So the finished story benefit of Tinder, when we can all go out and actually have social contact, is go out, have fun, and basically have sex. That's Tinder. Fine, we're not judging. That's kind of like, you will meet somebody good looking, you'll have a fun night out, and you'll have sex. That's what we give. That's what we give you. eHarmony says, come to us and we will help you find the person you want to marry. So they're both dating services, but they have a very different finished story benefit. So again, when you're thinking about your UVP, don't just say that you're a dating service, because it could be go have fun, get laid, or it could be find the man or woman of your dreams and get married. So I'm just going to show you. This is what I did for Tech for Non-Techies, and I would recommend that you start thinking about what you want to do for your companies. Basically, just start thinking about it now, because it's not difficult. So the problem, as I told you, tech feels impenetrable from the outside. And imagine this is a one pager, so you're not writing a business plan. Then I went to number 2, which is customer segments. So we talked about it's non-technical professionals who want to enter tech, but that's too wide. That's not, because some people want tips on how you make career transitions. Some people want to understand how to add more technology into the company they work in. Like they all have the same problem, but the solutions would need to be slightly different for each one. And who do I know most? I know other founders of or other aspiring founders of tech companies who don't have technical backgrounds. Like that's what I'm most comfortable with. So our first ever course that I created was Tech for Non-Technical Founders, which is literally like, how do you as a non-technical person go from having an idea to a live product, including who do you need to hire, what do you need to learn, how do you work with developers, how do you work with designers. And that was easy for me to create, because that was literally me saying, like, well, this is what I did, these are the people I learned from, do this. Now that that's been going for a while, I've noticed that the people who are coming to the founders courses actually had no intention of being founders, but they just wanted to understand this process better, because they either want to transition into tech companies, or they wanted to build tech products within the companies that they're working in. And so now I'm moving, like now I've got kind of the founders down, like that product works, I know how to do that, I know how to communicate with them, that's good. But also, like, I'm teaching that course at London Business School, that I'm not, I keep on kind of creating events for them, but I think the course is pretty good there. So now I'm moving from the early adopters, I'm moving up the customer segment line to non-technical professional employees. Like that's the next thing I want to target. And again, I've literally told you this within a single, well, basically within 3 columns, which is the opposite of the fictitious business plans that I know some of us have written. Then unique value proposition. So this, I'm just looking like I failed at this here. What I should have done, what I should have written is something like, understand tech jargon and find opportunities. Like that's what I should have written. Sorry. So you can see I'm making mistakes here. Instead, I've written more of a feature. So that's a benefit as opposed to the finished story. The finished story is that I want people to understand tech and then find opportunities for them. Okay, so that is so that's basically number 3. Do we have any questions about the canvas so far? Because I'm going to move on and talk about other aspects of the canvas. Okay, I'm assuming that you're just enthralled in how brilliant this is. I hope you are. So I'm just going to read you a few unique value propositions that Ash says are good. So, for example, he talks about the lean canvas. So the thing that we're discussing right now, he says that the UVP is spend more time building versus planning your business. I mean, I just love that. And also, since so many companies are cash strapped, we don't have the time to just sit there and make a strategic friggin' plan. So another thing that another example that he gives is UVP for Aliens, the movie, is Jaws in space. It's a bit 80s, but some of us might remember. Another one, UVP for YouTube, is Flickr for video. Okay, also a little bit old, but I think we get it. Okay, so now let's figure out where we're going next. I know. So once we've got our UVP, only then are we thinking about a solution. So the solution here is like, what's really important is, remember, just try not to go from solution first. And I've done it, and I know it's really tempting to do. I know it's really tempting to think, I have this solution, and let me just use blood, sweat, and tears to make it come to life. But just try not to do that, or at least try to go from problem to customer feedback to then making your solution. Because this is a Tech for Non-Techies thing, I have found that some people think, we want to make this app. That's kind of how they think. And honestly, that's how I used to think. And lots of people who've created successful businesses did used to think like that. What we then find out is that that's not necessarily the thing that you would have needed to do at the start. And also, because, Tech for Non-Techies, it is important to understand that you don't necessarily need to build technology from the start to make your solution. So what can you do to provide that solution in the cheapest possible way to test whether you need to test whether you actually need to hire developers or hire more staff. So can you use Wix? Actually, don't use Wix, use Squarespace. Squarespace I find is much more intuitive. What can you do out of the existing technology that works already? So can you try to do a social network using a meetup group or a Facebook group? Can you create something using a white label product to make your solution? Then what's your unfair advantage? So for example, in Tech for Non-Techies, I can tell you, did I write them? Oh no, that's something else. So my solution that I created, first it was just events and workshops, then online courses. Now we've got membership of events and online courses. So those are the solutions. But honestly, the solution is delivering, like what I want to do is I want to deliver knowledge so people can find opportunities. Right now it's in that form, but I told you, like, I'm going to be releasing a podcast. That's another solution. Then eventually it's going to become a book. Maybe it's going to be a Netflix show. I don't know. The solution is constantly changing, and the solution doesn't matter kind of in its microcosm so much. Then you think about what's your unfair advantage, and you've got to be honest with yourself here, both in a flattering and an unflattering way. So if you're really bad at something, then don't think that it's your unfair advantage. But also, if you're really good at something, kind of just admit it to yourself. So my unfair advantage with this is that I have done it. I found that there are a lot of developers who start trying to teach people like me tech skills, and I find it's really difficult to learn from them because they just explain jargon with jargon, and then I get embarrassed, and then I kind of pretend I understand and nothing actually happens. So my unfair advantage is I know how to talk to people like me because they're people like me. Again, if you don't know this right at the beginning, I found that number 5 was the hardest one for me to fill out at the beginning. But now that I've been running a company for a while, and also Tech for Non-Techies, I think it's existed for, well, probably about a year now, in various different iterations. So I kind of know that now, but that's not something I really knew at the beginning. So number 6, revenue streams. Again, here I would recommend just put down what you think is plausible, but you're not necessarily going to know. But just put whatever down. And essentially what you want to have is, oh, I forgot to put equals. You want to have number 7 equal number 6. Because when you've got your cost structure equaling your revenue streams, you're basically at break-even point. That's what you want to get to. If you are a non-technical founder or a non-technical person and you're trying to build a tech product, it's this bit, number 7, is going to be hard. So you're not necessarily going to understand Heroku costs or storage costs or hiring costs or whatever. That's why the less techy your solution can be, so the less techy number 4 is, the easier it would be for you to identify the cost structure right from the start. So does anybody have any questions? Do you want to make a comment? Anything? Because we're going to be done fairly soon. So this is your time. Now let's talk about, I want to tell you actually about revenue streams. What I have found consistently in both of my businesses, in NT and in Tech For Non-Techies, is that I have found revenue in places where I didn't expect. So I've made money in ways that I didn't foresee initially, which is a good thing. So that I'm going to start with a good thing. The bad thing is the ways in making money, like in NT, for example, I mistakenly thought that selling consumer insight data to brands and retailers at a large scale was going to be like pretty easy. Now I'm like doing B2B sales to the CIOs of brick and mortar businesses. No, that's really hard. These are not businesses that really understand big data yet. And so I only know this now. And literally when I was pitching this business to investors, when I was first starting out, that was the main revenue that I projected. And literally 4 years later, that has not happened in the same scale that I wanted. It's happened a bit, but nowhere near what I expected. And that's fairly normal. So that's fairly normal. So that's why it's not so great to sit there projecting what your cash flow statement is going to be in 5 years' time, because it's very, very unlikely it's going to be similar. However, we have made money in other ways. We have made money from our customer segments, so from brands and retailers, in other ways. They still want consumer insight. They just don't want it in kind of this data format because they don't know what to do with it. They prefer content. They prefer events. They prefer explanations, which is still providing a kind of a solution to their problem, to the same customer segment, but in a complete, I thought that they would want a dashboard and I thought that they would want to pay for it. They didn't. Anyway, I digress. So now let's talk about, what are we doing? Key metrics. Yes. The point of having key metrics is, okay, I've got a nice quote that I wanted to read you here. If I don't find it, I'll just have to ad lib it a bit. So what you want from your key metrics, okay, I'm gonna have to go from memory, is you want to be able to understand, kind of how much money you're making before you actually see the sales report. So what that means is, for example, I'm going to give you a really easy one. A key metric that I would measure on Tech For Non-Techies is the number of people I have signing up to a course. So for example, like I think it's in about 2 weeks' time, we've got a course starting called Business of Tech. And that's going to be about kind of how tech companies make money and how they spend money, how business models in tech slightly differ from traditional business models, and what are the opportunities for non-technical professionals in this course. So my key metric for that is the number of people who are, the number of students who are going to sign up. So obviously kind of that's one aspect. Because literally I can be like, okay, if 20 people sign up and the price is £89, I know how much money I'm going to make. But before that, another key metric, which will kind of give me an idea, is that before every single course, I do a free webinar where essentially I tell people for an hour about kind of the key concept. So you can come for an hour if you like it, but you don't actually want to learn the whole thing, then at least you got something from it. Or come for an hour if you absolutely hate it, then at least you haven't paid anything. So in general, I kind of know what the conversion rate is from the free webinar to the paid course. Like that's something that I know. So even before I look at the money bit, so how many actual students paid what, like how many of them got a special offer, how many of them paid the full price, how many of them got full price plus a consulting thing, whatever. I can literally look at how many people signed up to the free webinar, and that will already give me some kind of indicator of the money that Tech for Non-Techies is going to be making in about 2 weeks' time. So I would think that when you think about your key metrics, obviously think about revenue, like the money you're going to be making, but also what are the bits earlier on in the funnel that are going to be able to tell you where you're likely to be. So, the webinar, if you want to come, if you want to up my numbers, that would be amazing. It's next Monday at 5:30 p.m. London time. But essentially, I'm watching that free webinar registration number with more interest that I'm watching pretty much any other key metric right now. So, channels. Let's talk about channels. In my experience, the reason I think he's got number 9 in a small box, you see how we've got solution in a small box, key metrics in a small box, unfair advantage, and channels in small boxes, and the other ones are in big boxes. So he didn't actually explain why in the book, but I would assume that your solution changes so much, so don't spend too much time discussing it, because your solution changes, inevitably your key metrics change. Right? Like, so for example, if instead of doing a course, I was writing a book, my key metrics would be completely different. My unfair advantage also changes because I don't necessarily know what my unfair advantage is. Maybe if some kind of, I don't know, if Bill Gates walked in the room, would I have an unfair advantage? I'm not sure, honestly. So that's kind of situational. Channels also change very, very quickly. So Facebook and Google, yes, they are dominant, but also, for example, again, looking at Tech for Non-Techies, our meetup group has been one of the great sources of me connecting with new people and finding new students, but also, people attending these free things and, partners and various other things. So that's when I think, I'm not even sure when meetup actually came to exist. And honestly, I never had a meetup strategy. I didn't know anything about it. But now meetup is actually one of our key channels. Another key channel, which I never expected, is Eventbrite. So literally, I would put up these events, and I think some of you have come from Eventbrite. I didn't know that people actually search for events on Eventbrite. I didn't realize that Eventbrite was its own kind of search engine for events, but that's become a channel for us. So that's why I kind of don't stress too much. Put whatever you think is in there and then test them. If it doesn't work, then find new channels and test them further and further. What is important to understand, what I mentioned before, was that, I'm going to quote here, is that the initial goal of a startup is to learn and not to scale. So at first, it's okay to rely on any channels that get you in front of potential customers. So that literally means that if you've got potential customers in a fan group of Justin Bieber, then go and become a member there. Do whatever you have to do. When we could do IRL events, maybe your long-term strategy, your scalable strategy, is not going to be doing presentations in cafes, but literally some of the first few Tech for Non-Techies events I literally held in a cafe in King's Cross. And now it's scaling, but literally began with a cafe. If you want to think more about channels and kind of where to start, there's a really, really good essay by Paul Graham. Paul Graham is the founder of Y Combinator, which is the top global accelerator for tech people. and Airbnb and various other companies came out of that. He wrote an essay called Do Things That Don't Scale. So I'd highly recommend that. And I think that's relevant to channels. Actually, if you're interested in Y Combinator stuff, on our YouTube channel, there is an interview with a Y Combinator alumna who is a non-technical founder of a tech company who went to Y Combinator and now set up a global network, which is basically a dating network for queer women. It's super cool. Right, so the channel thing and the thing about scaling and the thing about reaching customers is what we talked about when we talked about, I'll show you, come on, when we talked about what investors want. Okay, so remember this was, no, this is it. So investors want you to grow, whereas early stage founders want learning. So this is why it's much better that you are looking for money, or you're only talking to investors when you've already tested your channels and you know which channels to use to scale. When you don't know which channels to use to scale, you will inevitably make some mistakes. And so, for example, for NT, the consumer app, we completely underestimated the cost for Facebook marketing. I mean, completely underestimated. And once we understood that that was a key channel, like in the consumer space, if you're making a consumer app, about 80% of your users are going to come from Facebook. That's kind of true across the board, whether you're a language learning app or e-commerce or whatever. If you're facing consumers, you're going to have to spend a lot of money on Facebook, because Facebook knows that. Obviously, Facebook charges you a lot of money to do that. We completely underestimated that, and we'd already raised money, and then obviously ended up having to make our projections different. So if you possibly can avoid that problem by scaling and raising money when you already tested your channels. For us, it wasn't possible at the time, because we needed money to even create the product. So I would say, if you're raising money, or if you're going to be raising money, raise as little as you possibly can at the beginning. Like we raised a small amount of money at the start, but we've raised some to just create the product, and then basically channel testing. Okay, ladies and gents, we're gonna finish up here in 3 minutes. So, oh my God, you've all managed to stay throughout the entire hour. Well done. Do you have any questions or comments or anything? I'm just gonna leave the floor open for the next 3 minutes, because this is my final slide. And actually, I'm thinking of whether doing something like this again. And the next book, if I am to do this, the next book I would review is another book that I found super helpful. It's called The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. Have you heard of that book? Have you read that book? Answers in the chat box would be much appreciated. Would you come, or would you just be like, no, this is rubbish, I'm not doing this again? You would come. Thank you, Ian. Oh, thanks, guys. Okay, honestly, that book, I keep on reading and rereading that book. I think that book is basically therapy for entrepreneurs. It's written by one of the world's top venture capitalists, and it's, before he was a venture capitalist, he was a product manager and a CEO, and now he's the co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz. And Andreessen Horowitz is one of the top Silicon Valley investment firms. And he wrote this book, which is just friggin' brilliant. Anyway, so on that note, thank you so much for coming. This has been super good. I'm going to be thinking about whether to do this again, given how much time I have. But tomorrow, we've got an event with some venture capitalists, speaking of which. Tomorrow, 2 venture capitalists are talking about what non-technical founders how non-technical founders should approach investors, and tips on how to find your technical co-founder, and things like how much equity you should give your technical co-founder, and essentially how to work with your CTO. One of the VCs there, they're called Antler. They actually specialize in matching technical co-founders with non-technical founders. So that's tomorrow. And then on Monday, we've got the Business of Tech webinars. So hope to see you at one or both of these events. Oh, I can see somebody wrote a message. When I'm just trying to get it. Okay, awesome. Well, on that note, onwards and upwards. Have a fabulous evening. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been great. Bye.